Hello everyone, I'm High Treason, and today I'm going to be taking a look at a PC game called Atlantis Lost Tales, though I'm henceforth just going to refer to it as Atlantis because it's easier, it's what I've always done. And it came out also on the shitty PlayStation and the Sega Saturn systems. I don't know much about those ports, I've never even seen them. I know they exist, so they're going to have no bearing on anything here today. We're not going to see what those look like, because I really don't care. I'm not going to play them. So yeah, let's take a look at this thing. Let's start with having a look at the packaging, because that's important. Like any good game, Atlantis is in a big cardboard box with pretty nice artwork. It shows how times have changed though, because it uses computer graphics and not the hand-drawn graphics of earlier games. Nods that use the computer-assisted drawings games from just a short time earlier had usually come with. So that's an interesting relic. I can't floor the box, and it really has no effect on the final score or anything. But one thing might do in this case, the system requirements, because this does affect the score. I heard that Cryo revised these later, but what they changed them to I don't know for certain. All I know is my version of the box claims that the game will run on a Pentium 90 as a minimum. Well, I don't have one of those set up right now, but my Pentium Overdrive is about the same when it's running at 100 MHz. I mean, believe me, this thing's stupid fast for a 486 platform. So we'll have a look at it on there later just to find out. Otherwise, 16 megabytes of RAM isn't too heavy when you think Blood really asks you for double that amount, and is from the same year. I'm not sure the original release does though. I think that's quite happy to run in less memory and just crash quite often. Interestingly, Blood has similar problems with its system requirements to this one, stating that it runs on a Pentium 75, which I know for a fact is not true. Enough about that game though, I really don't want to talk about it here. If you want a review of it, hey, sure, maybe that'll happen, but you won't like what I have to say. Let me know in the comments when the video's done. That'd be interesting to see if anybody minds the idea of that, because it could happen. DirectX is required for the Windows version of Atlantis, which wasn't always a given at the time. Many games still either used software or ran in DOS. Even when they said Windows 95 on the box, they often just ran in a DOS box, or little better than a DOS box, just ported to run in Windows. There is a DOS version of the game on the disc, however, and it doesn't seem to run much different to the Windows one, so how much DirectX functionality is actually used here I don't know. The manual is pretty nice, and you get this little sheet that tells you the controls. You might think that's crappy, but that's really all you need. The game's a point-and-click puzzle game, so if you've used Windows, the chances are you're going to be able to operate this game. They really weren't complicated. The larger book just gives us a backstory, and it's very nicely done. It is in monochrome, but there are graphics in it that are made specifically for it and never appear in the game, such as certain sketches here and the backgrounds of the pages, so somebody did put effort into this at least. The game is stored on 4 CD-ROMs in this case here, and that wasn't uncommon at the time, and I can think of a few other games that did this. Installation. Well, I'm not even going to show you the installation process because it's really short and simple. It doesn't even have a visible installer on the screen. You just click install and it kinda happens. The game appears to just install what I would call the Cryo client to the hard drive, or the Omni 3D client. Everything which actually makes up the game is still on the CD-ROM, and only the client, save files and some cached data are stored on the hard drive. Of course, you may have to install DirectX for the game to run, but that is also quite simple, and I see no need to really go over that here as it's a very standard procedure. First impressions. Upon starting the game, you get an animated intro before being asked to enter your name. It's not uncommon at the time to have something like this at the start of the game. In fact, everyone was doing it. Starting up, it'll then give you a long cutscene which tells you a bit about Atlantis, its people, and the guy you play as.
Emerges slowly from prehistory, the hidden people of Atlantis enjoy an already ancient civilization, rich in wonder and sophistication. Since the beginning of
his name is Seth, and he's a Queen's companion. According to the manual, this is something young people on Atlantis often end up doing for a few years, and then they end up going home. They'll usually take up the same job as their parents, though they could choose to join the Palace Guard when their time as a companion's over. Seth's father is a fisherman according to the manual, so that's probably what he'd do if things went according to plan. Which of course they don't, because that would be pretty boring. I mean, if Seth just basically did his job and then went home and became a fisherman for the next hour of the game, you know, that would... Well, I don't know, it could be a fishing simulator, but that's not what it says on the box, so that would be pretty disastrous. Graphics. Yeah, well, is that cutscene over yet? Oh, wait, this is the game? It is. I have control now. First-person shooter lovers will be horribly disappointed to find you don't have free movement as such. You can look around 360 degrees and a little up and down, but you can't just walk to anywhere. Instead you have to click in a direction and Seth will head that way if the game allows it, which is indicated by this arrow cursor appearing. Much of the time there are pre-rendered animations of him moving to the next location on the track, which can be cancelled if you click again, which will just instantaneously move him to that destination. The pre-rendered environments look nice. Actually, Crysis really reminded me of this game when it came out. Though, of course, that was done in real time, showing how far computers had come on in 10 years. Or not, because Crysis ran like shit. I think this was a very interesting way of overcoming the limits of technology at the time, and Atlantis wasn't the only game to do this. It sure was an improvement over all the games that acted like this, such as Myst, which just ran like a slideshow with almost no animation at all. The environments look better here anyway, so even if it was just still images like Myst, it would still be an improvement, which you would expect so many years later. I should clarify that the games are completely unrelated and they were made by different studios, though they do have similar names. I would like to know what they rendered the game with though. The level of detail is quite impressive, and they're actually animated objects inside the game world. Whether they be as simple as lit torches or as complex as guards walking around trying to arrest you, it's a bit of a puzzle how they actually got that working at all.
Hey, you! Companion!
Seth got careless and paid the price. Nothing was ever heard of him or Rhea again.
Omni 3D is the name of the game engine, and it sure seems to work. I'm quite impressed. This game uses motion capture for the people apparently, the character models, which is quite impressive for the time, as not many people did that yet. I'm not sure it always pays off though, because the animation loops are short and they do look a bit dodgy. They're no worse than anything else in this era, but yeah, they're far from perfect. They're kind of laughable today. I mean, especially in dialogue, where the game displays a character model on a pre-rendered backdrop. They often don't scale properly, and their movement is dependent on the speed of your CPU. Play on a faster computer and they'll look really messed up.
You remember, bring me some wine.
OmniSync does a good job with lip sync for the time though. Not entirely convincing, but it's not bad either. It's kind of a happy medium. So it's impressive in its own right, I suppose. You're not just stuck on the island of Atlantis for the whole game anyway, so there are other environments such as the forest-covered island of Carbonac you travel to fairly early in the game, or the first island of Standing God. My personal favourite location in the game is Spitzberg, I believe it's called. The ice place here, it looks amazing, and some of the pre-rendered animations here are long, and are used to very good effect. Damn polar bears, I hate polar bears, they all need nuking! Of course, like any good game in this genre, the final areas become quite surreal, which is something I really liked about these older games. It seems that this kind of thing is an art form which has been somewhat lost, in part due to newer 3D engines making it harder, if not impossible, to bend the rules of reality in the way that these games did. As an example, the game pulls a trick like Duke Nukem 3D, where different versions of the same room exist in the same place. The game rapidly devolves into mind-bending weirdness shortly thereafter. Sound. Being a Windows game, it doesn't require any setup for the sound card, which is quite nice. The DOS version's actually quite good at detecting your setup as well, and doesn't require too much tempering to be done to actually make it work if you're on a machine that's inclined to work. Of course, DOS executables are always a bit hit and miss. The game makes good use of its sound effects when they're there. In fact, you need to listen to them sometimes, such as here, where you need to avoid the guards. You have to listen to his footsteps so you know when he is at the other end of the corridor, which allows you to run up the stairs and get mad at the puzzle you have to do several times in this game. The music is nice. Again, I refer to Blood, a game from the same year as this one, which had very boring music for the most part. Almost as if the guy had either never touched a keyboard before or just didn't put the effort in. Atlantis tried to do something unique, and Pierre Steve and Stephanie Pick came up with some really good stuff. It's fairly ambient and atmospheric, but there's a definite turn of Mediterranean and even Arabic music in most of it. And I swear there's just a touch of Greek. There's this underlying Greek turn to this game in places. I can't put my finger on how, but it's just the vibe I get off of it. There are also good electronic sounds in use here, and they help to add depth. Not enough people will mix electronic instruments onto otherwise acoustic tracks, and that kind of sucks, because it does work really well. My personal favourite track is one called Stonehenge, which I can only assume was meant for Carbon X Stonehenge structure, but never used there. If that's the case, I think the change was a wise one, because it instead plays at the top of this tower, and, well, listen. Damn, that's awesome! Something about hearing that after being stuck in the dark innards of the palace for a while with lengthy puzzles, now enjoying daylight as you hang off the railings of the tower and look out over the world of Atlantis is quite powerful. This to me is possibly the most memorable moment in the game, and further proof of what I've always said: the soundtrack can make or break a game. I wouldn't necessarily listen to music like the game's soundtrack every day, but when you're actually playing the game, it certainly fits it very, very well. And it fits the game well. It helps to impress upon you what it would be like if you actually were in that world as Seth, and that really takes some doing. The dialogue is a bit 1997 video gamey. You sure wouldn't see this in a Hollywood movie. In fact, that would probably worse these days, come to think of it. Yeah. But it's also not as bad as it could be. In fact, I think the voice actors at least tried here, even if they didn't always do it perfectly. And I also think they had fun with it, which is always a helping factor. You can at least understand what they are saying and how they're trying to say it, even if it's cheesy and exaggerated a lot of the time.
She was on the coast road with some companions, and they were attacked.
Amber, who attacked them?
Nobody knows yet. All the companions with her were killed.
Joris?
And to be honest, I'd rather have that than a game with dialogue that's hard to understand, and as there are very few games had yet gotten voices right, I think they did the best you could hope for at the time, so I can't really be too harsh on it. Surprisingly, the dialogue also helped me remember the game. Something about those short animation loops and the cheesy voice acting can just be hilarious at times. If your computer is too fast or too slow, you can lose sync with pre-rendered cutscenes, and that is mildly annoying. As the rest of mankind probably start up again, unless it... There we go.
As the rest of mankind emerges slowly from prehistory.
Atmosphere. Being low on the action side of things, the game has to do well here, and it actually does. The music we talked about does of course help with this immensely, but it's another of those games where something is just right with it, something you can't put your finger on. The best example of how atmospheric the game can be is probably towards the end of the game, when you're in the weird place I won't talk about too much. That music's just unnerving. The environment is disorientating, and this crazy lady just plays with her spinning wheel in the middle of the platform here.
I've come because of the statue. I'm trying to learn of the past.
This just smells like death to me, and it makes me feel uncomfortable, and really quite on edge. The game lays the atmosphere on thick, and it doesn't let up. Though it does seem the developers have a sense of humour, which might break the mood occasionally. I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing, but like anything in review, that's open for debate, and you might not agree with me.
You're going up in that?
Come on, you might enjoy it.
Somehow, I doubt it.
Story and design. The story is lengthy and in-depth as you'd expect an adventure game to be. Except this is a puzzle game according to the developers, at least as far as I know, and this raises an interesting predicament I'll talk about in a moment. The story starts out that you are Seth, a young guy who joined the Queen's companions. Basically you hang out at the palace for a few years, accompany the Queen to a few places, empty the shitter occasionally, and go home when your time is up. Seth expects this to go smoothly, and predictably it doesn't. He gets to the palace only to find the Queen is gone, and the consort has ordered nobody poke into the whole thing. Sounds a bit suspect to me. There are other parts of the plot going on, such as religion on the island. For years, Amu has been the god they worship, but a more sinister religion worshipping Sa'at is gaining ground again. The consort is rather fascinated with this religion, it seems, as is the high priest Gimbas. Gimp-ass. Why do I want to punch these people already? Nothing to do with religion. I just want to punch them because they're just punch-worthy people. I would seriously kick the shit out of them if I met them in the street.
And remember, orders are to be obeyed.
Obviously, you go off looking for the Queen. Find that a larger plot is at work and end up on a lengthy adventure to stop the evil powers that are at work here. It's actually not that bad for its time though. By today's standards it probably does have quite a few plot holes, a few rushed elements and a few underdeveloped ideas. This was common enough at the time though, and for 1997 it doesn't really do anything wrong. Sitting somewhere in the middle, but don't get me wrong, it's actually quite fun finding out more and progressing in the game, and a few things do come out of nowhere. The characters all have their own quirks and personality. I mean, Seth even has a personality to a degree, which I liked seeing a protagonist. They at least tried to develop a character here. And it turned out pretty decent, to be honest.
His Highness told me to be a good boy.
Many games are content to have a faceless person walking around the game world, never saying anything. And they didn't here. That's a good thing. Each character behaves differently towards other characters they interact with. You have good people and bad people, as well as people who are just a bit of an unknown quantity. Like, I don't trust this guy, but at the same time he seems to be helping me out. Those kind of people. As for this guy, I hate him. 18 years of hate right there. I want him dead. The developers must have done something right there, because I remembered this guy, the music and the game overscreen, for nearly 2 decades. His name is Melgens, and he's a dick. Just listen to him.
You around here, eh? Give me some wine.
Yeah, I'll give you some wine, you pompous southerner bastard, laced with fucking antifreeze. Yeah, drink up, asshole. Yeah, don't do that. It just gives you a game over, but that's okay.
Good boy. Are you sure he's a companion, Agatha? He'd make a better servant.
There isn't much penalty for losing the game, and it just puts you back a little
And now you
bit.
want to be a hero? You'll stay right here. Young Seth had failed his first test. As
There are
for
also
Queen
save
Ray,
games which
she
are
was
done
not.
automatically at certain intervals. They don't interrupt the game when it's saving. You can actually skip cutscenes and such the first time seeing them. So you can load the game again if you do it by accident, as the save feature just creates a list of automatic save points that you've gone past in the load menu. There's no manual saving, and you really don't need it, to be honest. Probably just as well, because Melgens will make your life a misery a few times in this game. Not just him, but he's the one I remember the best, and I hate him. I absolutely hate him. I'm gonna kill him. What?
Seth
Yeah,
was
figures you
brave,
can't
but
do
it
that,
wasn't enough.
because it'd ruin the plot. No problem. The story's good enough to keep players interested, I think, and certainly wanting to see the end of Melgens, which, come on man, it's got to happen, please, is something enough just to keep me playing it. The game seems to be well made enough anyway. The biggest problem I had was where one item appeared twice in the inventory, but everything still worked, so the game was unaffected. The puzzles are mostly good, and they occupy your mind enough, but they don't go overboard. Most of the time. Some are frustrating as hell with no explanation, and others are just plain annoying, including this one involving Melgens, which I couldn't get past 18 years ago. God, I want that guy dead! You may have to consult a walkthrough for some of the game if your patience isn't very good. Some of the challenges require you to move quickly, and this is surprisingly effective in the limited interface. I actually feel that weird clenching feeling in my butt when I'm getting chased in this game. It actually feels like I am being chased, more so than it would if I had completely free movement in the game world. Now, a problem. The system requirements. Let's run this on that Pentium overdrive there. Wow, now that's not too impressive, is it? No cutscene ran in sync on anything slower than a Pentium 2 for me, and I don't think those were too common in 1997. My dad was still getting used to his new Pentium MMX 166, which had only come out in January that year. The Pentium 2 was an expensive, high-performance part, which sold for over $1,900 back then. Even the Pentium MMX was close to $800 at launch, though this dropped to around $150 by the time this game had arrived. And these prices are for the CPU alone in 1997. I mean, that Pentium 2 would be well over $3,000 today, you know, adjusting for inflation. They don't include what everything else would have cost back then either with the prices I'm giving out. Computing certainly wasn't affordable yet. That was about 3 years away before that would really start taking off. I find the AMD K6 to be a good platform for this, probably about 350 MHz. But if you're stuck with an older computer, the K5 seems to run it marginally better than a Pentium for some reason, and it is quite playable. For reference sake, I recorded most of this game with a K6 250 MHz, or thereabouts. I keep changing the clock speed for other reasons and this game. I'm just messing about with this thing, so I can't be sure what it's running at the whole time, but let's say between 250 and 350 MHz. I think the majority was recorded at 250. I likely did change it at some stage though, so maybe not all of it.
Go up the steps.
The problem is the K6-2 didn't arrive until 1998. In fact, the fastest K6 when this game was released was the 233 MHz model of the original K6, which might have just barely run the game as well as it had needed to, but geez, I mean, you'd be pushing your luck by then, because that would be quite expensive, and even then I'm not sure it'd keep everything in sync quite right. And it's interesting how our perceptions of playable have changed now, because back then a 166MHz Pentium with an ATI Max 64 seemed perfectly playable, and the desync actually just was something that happened. You honestly thought nothing of it, it was just the way things were. And it is still playable even on this slower Pentium overdrive system, really. But it's weird how you notice these little things you would have ignored back then. We've all been spoiled by how much less this stuff costs at the moment. Though I don't doubt it'll become more expensive in the future. I mean, it does kind of grind my gears sometimes when people, including me, complain about the cost. You always just try and remember that really this stuff did used to cost a hell of a lot more, especially if adjusted for inflation. I have no choice really but to dock points though, as the game doesn't technically run properly in the hardware it's stated on the box. I did test it with that hardware at an earlier date, and it ran pretty much identically to how it did on the overdrive, which is why I'm happy to just use my overdrive as an example for the sake of this video. A lot of reviewers let other games get away with things like that in 1997, so hey, you know, maybe I should say, hey, everyone's got DOSBox now, so this has no bearing on anything. But no, I don't like being dishonest, so I'm sorry, Atlantis. I love you, but I have to dock points. Now, an interesting issue with this game is that it's a puzzle game first and foremost, and it just happens to act like an adventure game a lot of the time, because it actually has a somewhat coherent plot. Reviewers seemingly hated this game for the most part, and criticised damn near everything back when it came out. The thing is, that would be fine, I could accept that this was their opinion. But then these same people would usually go off and praise Riven for the same reasons that they didn't like this game. And there's the reasons I don't understand. Riven is from the same time period and uses similar technology, and even the name of its studio, Cyan, sounds similar to the one which developed Atlantis, Cryo. To me, Riven is much less refined than this game, especially on the adventure side, which they pushed a little bit more than Cryo did with Atlantis, meaning their marketing wasn't even as good. How can you have multiple rules for different games that are doing the same thing? That doesn't work except in exceptional circumstances. For example, if one game was built for VR goggles, it would change the rules of the review. But that isn't the case. They're both built to run on PCs in the same time period. And they are in the same genre, effectively. They're trying to achieve the same thing on the same hardware. So therefore the same rules apply. Both games run on the PC. Both games have pretty much the same interface. Both games even look to be rendered on similar hardware. It wouldn't surprise me if whatever system it was pretty much identical. But Riven is really rough around the edges, quite literally on some of the transitional screen wipes that happen. It lacks the movement of Atlantis, and it has worse dialogue, and even more holes in its plot. I honestly thought it was much older than Atlantis. I thought it was from like 1995, and in fact Atlantis came out 1 month and 1 day earlier than Riven. Meaning Atlantis is technically an older game, and perhaps this is a case of early corruption in the gaming journalism. Or maybe the reviewer's just full of shit like I probably am. Who knows, but either way, something very strange was going on there, and I feel that that was well and truly wrong to put these games at such opposite ends of the spectrum. Somebody was clearly being dishonest or paid off or something, and that just gets on my nerves. I don't see any good reason to do that. It's absolutely ridiculous. This isn't even a nostalgia thing, because I played Riven back when I played this game first, and I still thought it was the inferior game. I honestly thought it was older than Atlantis, and it just is not something I can get into my head, is that Riven actually came out later, and that Myst and Riven are the games people are still talking about, that get remakes, that get all the nice treatment, while this one has gone on, been forgotten, and is now ignored. It's a real shame. Controls and gameplay. About as good as you could expect. In this type of game it should be simple and intuitive, given it exists primarily to advance the plot and nothing more, and really it pulls it off just fine. The controls are done with the mouse, and pretty much only the mouse. You can click where you want to move to, or if the cast changes to things like this, you can click where you want to interact with something in the game world. A right click at any time will bring up the inventory, and objects can be picked up or placed in the inventory. As stated, nothing alien to users of the Windows interface really. You'd get the grasp of it soon enough, and it works the same way through the entire game. They made some good use of variety though, something you wouldn't necessarily expect there. The controls remain the same, but instead of navigating to your next puzzle, you are sometimes timed. This might be as simple as running away from angry guards, or something more complicated, like hunting and killing a boar with a crossbow. I mean, don't get too excited, Seth isn't a killing man, and it's pretty much the only thing you really kill in the game. Things like this are enough in my opinion though. They keep you interested because they're changing the game enough. But that's about it. It's simple and it works. Point and click games generally don't require the complicated mechanisms of their derivatives or other genres. So, to summarise. Graphics, 19 out of 20. I can't really floor these too much. I mean, this is clearly one of the things they were really going for in this. So beyond the scaling issue in dialogue and the odd artifact here and there, you'll probably never notice. I mean, they're impressive for the time, with an interesting means of overcoming limitations of computer technology back then. And it sure as hell looked really stunning in 1997. I'd never seen anything like it before. Audio, 18 out of 20. A good job on the music and sound effects. Even the voice actors tried their best. I honestly do feel they did put their best into it. And it doesn't fare too badly, all things considered, even if it is a bit cheesy. Really, I'm only marking it down for two reasons. I mean, it is a given, I have to mark down the voice acting, because it's not award-winning stuff back then. And there's a bug that occurs with some CD-ROM drives where it cuts off the start of the dialogue, so maybe they could have tried to buffer things a little bit more effectively. The soundtrack alone makes up for it in my mind, though, as I do feel a Steve and Pick really put their hearts into the music for this game. You can just hear it oozes effort. They did really try, and it sure as hell paid off. Atmosphere, 19 out of 20. I can't really find fault with it, and only dock 1 point for the jerking dialogue, but some of it's actually pretty amusing.
You've considered all the options.
Get in the bag.
You're sure?
So I'm not going to be too harsh on that, because really that kind of adds something to the game. The game is good at getting its message across. It can go from calm and serene to being dark and foreboding quite nicely, sometimes without warning. I certainly won't be walking into any random caves on the beach anytime soon anyway, let's put it that way.
Remind me to put you in a bag someday.
Story and design. Unfortunately, failing to meet the system spec very well incurs a pretty heavy penalty on my scoring system, so there's a heads up for if you still want that blood review. It remains playable, but it can affect the gaming experience and player immersion. It could be worse, and it's of little concern today when hardware is much easier to obtain, but that's not how my scoring system works. And at least right now the hardware is easy to obtain. I mean, I think Pentium 2 and K62 systems are fairly easy to get hold of for now, and they'll run the game very well. I'd go for a fast K6, as you can always underclock the processor because they don't have a fixed multiplier, and therefore you can be quite precise with it. The Pentium 2 though does have a fixed multiplier and only 2 bus speeds available, so really K6 boards are the ones to choose for this, as they'll usually support Pentium, Cyrix, IDT and Rise as well, and you can really fiddle with the clock speed if you want the game to run absolutely perfectly. Otherwise, the game's actually really well designed, with some very interesting elements. The story is intriguing enough that you'll probably become invested in it at least enough to want to get to the end of the game, just to solve the next puzzle and find out more about the world in the game. Except that a few puzzles are unfair, which does lose the game another point or two, I suppose. Overall, I really do think it was good, and they did well with it. Controls and gameplay, 18 out of 20. As I said earlier, it's simple and effective, no real problems. The main issue is how you might lose the centre of the screen and find yourself rattling the cursor around trying to find it to interact with something, and it isn't always immediately obvious which way you can move or which objects you can interact with. They did fix the centre screen problem in the sequel by putting a crosshair there. Of course, Riven got a free pass from a lot of people for the kind of nonsense that this game really got hammered for, usually connected to levers, which caused random noises to go off, whilst you had no idea what they did and the place to click them wasn't always self-explanatory. And that doesn't really happen in this game, so I assure you it's scoring higher than that one would. Strangely, you can actually look around with the function keys on the keyboard, but this has little practical purpose and is not documented. The only place I've found a use for it is where I was stood spinning Seth around in that cave earlier. So the total score here is 89 of 100. It's a pretty good game. I mean, it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but at the same time, it's clear they certainly put the effort in, and the game has enough going for it that you can ignore the small problems quite easily, or just laugh at them and forget about them quite quickly. There are too many big things that make the game good. Even the token 90s woman.
Don't ask me to do that again.
Because for some reason, if you had a woman in a game back then as a character, at least of any importance, she had to be like that. Well, that's probably better than what's around now, especially when the developers take a winning design and then fucking ruin it. Fucking hell, if that was ever a hipster convention of developers, hey, what's next? Making games on old engines and then having them not run on the game engine's intended hardware and operating system. A bit like those Keen games, but at least those were fan-made stuff. I mean, no, honestly, I'm putting money on this will happen at some point. Why am I saying this? Well, Atlantis is available on GOG.com, but I have no idea as to whether you can then run it on the real PC, and finding a physical copy might not be easy as I don't think it sold very well, though it doesn't seem to be very expensive when it does appear. I got mine complete in this box for less than £15, so really nobody cares about this, and it's probably better spent than going and buying Riven. Still, if you get a chance and the price is right, go ahead and play this game because it's really worth a look and it's certainly above average. You'd be missing out if you passed it by, and if you find that you really liked Riven, then yeah, you should definitely go and play this. I'd be quite interested to hear what you made of it, because that, I don't know, just fascinates me. I'm failing to see the real difference here and why things went the way they did, and that's got to me quite a bit. It always has. That's like 18 years of confusion right there.
Yeah, and that's really about it, I think, for Atlantis The Lost Tales. It's not bad. People like Riven, and I still think that's stupid. I don't think it's stupid to like Riven, but I think it's stupid that Riven is the one that gets the recognition, and the Myst games seem to get these remakes and stuff, and this one's been left alone, but I'm glad it don't get a remake, because I don't like remakes. I think James Rolfe said it best on that, and I don't like quoting him in a video about games, because now I just feel like a talentless rip-off hack for doing it, but he said remakes are like wiping your arse with the same piece of toilet paper. And I thought that statement was so good, I don't need to come up with my own. I'll just quote the guy because it was a good statement. It sums it up. So yeah, it doesn't need a remake. You should be able to find it cheap if you want to play it, but I don't know if it has any replay value. So you might play it through one time, and obviously it's linear. There's not really anywhere to deviate. That's the nature of such games. So you might want to move it on afterwards unless you find you really like it, or if you have a particular attachment to it, like I do. Obviously, I want to play it again. I'll probably never get bored of it because I'm that way inclined, but that's up to you. So it really is a relic of a time gone by. You would never see a game like that today, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. Whether you agree with me or not, I don't know. I don't know anything. So if you want to say something about this, or just ramble aimlessly for no reason, there is a comment section, should be below this video unless YouTube screwed the layout up, so by all means tell me what you think. And there's stupid buttons around the video, I don't know, they have words on them like and subscribe and things like that, so I don't know, but I can't make you do anything. By all means just press the little thumbs down and write rude comments instead of doing something positive. It makes no odds to me. So I'm High Treason, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Hopefully I can get another video out this year, but hey, who knows. I'll try. Thanks for watching.